has been a wonderful privilege and pleasure to be with you in this location. It's a beautiful place and wonderful church. I had a great time presenting the message today. It was really, that message is very important to me because it changed my life, and what the second hour is a part of this that will also change the way I see things, that change the way me as a person. Okay, he wants me to move. Okay, all right. I'll try to. You see, I like to. I will be speaking without notes right now, so I'm not attached to anything. So I'll be. So you just tell me where you need me to go. Okay. What I would like to present to you this afternoon is result of the study that was commissioned. Okay, so let me just tell you very briefly my area of expertise where I'm beginning to hearing myself. My area of expertise, what I did my studies in, is Roman Catholic ecclesiology, Roman Catholic understanding of church. And when I did this stuff, this work, I never imagined that it will become so incredibly relevant in my teaching and preaching ministry later on. So I didn't expect it. But in 2010, the General Conference, President and the committee, they all voted to have a study on issue ordination. They wanted to have this issue discovered, studied, and in depth. And I was one of the people commissioned to publish and present at the committee called Theology of Ordination Study Committee. And I really delved into a huge research between 2010, or even earlier than that, but 2010, 11, 12, and I published a number of publications and presentations for the church in that area of issue of ordination. So eventually I was asked to be part of the Theology of Ordination Study Committee, and I attended those meetings, and I worked with, the closer you come, the less I can move. Okay. So I became a part of this thing, and I want to let you know that there are some people who accuse me of being liberal and departing from church and all these kind of things. Well, I'm a conservative Adventist. I believe exactly 28 fundamentals. They are mine. I'm a Seventh-day Adventist, committed Seventh-day Adventist, and my work is done in support of the church, not to detriment of the church. But my work challenged people also, and some people don't know how to deal with what I present, what I teach right now, and it's kind of like, what do we do with this? Okay, so what I'm going to present to you is a fraction of what I have. So it's not much what I can do in 2 hours. Usually takes longer. So first hour we'll talk about ordination. Second hour we'll talk about authority. Two big issues in our church right now that we fight about. I'll approach the first hour historically, and then the second hour I will talk about biblically. We'll go to the Bible. I wanted to say something, but I forgot. Okay, but anyway. So we're going to go in a little bit of a historical discovery, because my problem, this is my issue, okay? My big issue with the whole discussion in Adventist Church on women's ordination, okay? We discuss whether we should ordain women or not, and we fight about that. Should women be pastors or should women ordain and whatever. But we never go step back and discuss what is ordination, what does the Bible talk about ministry, what is the nature of the church. And that's the nature of you see, when you look at the Catholic Church, there's a specific idea of the church. When you look at the Adventist Church, there's a specific idea of the church. And the question needs to be asked, whether the biblical idea of the church that we have, whether it would allow certain things like women's ordination or not. Catholic idea of the church, would it allow or not? And Catholic Church theologians would say absolutely not. The doctrine of church, as presented by Catholic Church, disallows women's ordination. It's absolutely impossible. It can't happen. It will never happen. Women will never be ordained in Roman Catholic Church. It is impossible, and I'll explain to you why later on. So how about Adventist church? We are Protestants. It's a different ballgame altogether. And sometimes I discovered that we borrow ideas from sources like Catholicism, implement them, put them into Adventist understanding of church, and then you come up with all kinds of confused ideas. So my role was to go step back and just think about ordination, church, ministry, and what it is all about. So there's a lot of stuff that I have that I will not have chance to present to you, but if you are interested, I've got some publications. I can give them to you on a thumb drive, and you can read them later on in your own time, and you'll get the whole picture. So basically I've got 2 or 3 papers that are important, that will deal with this issue. So we're going to address the issue. I've got 45 minutes to address the issue of ordination. So we're not going to talk about women's ordination here. We're going to talk about ordination, and let's see what kind of conclusions you will come up with when I'm done. Okay? So what you see here on this photo is a typical way of doing ordinations. This is where you see ordained men who are right here, and this is men who are to be ordained, okay, and they are laying hands on the young men, ordaining them to gospel ministry. So there's a bunch of them here. I don't know where it is, but I found this picture online, and they're just praying over those people who are going to become ministers, and there's a few of them here. But what you see here on this picture, this is kind of important. When you take this picture and compare it to what you find in the New Testament, you will find out that this does not correspond to what we have in the Bible. There's no direct correspondence of this event to what we find in the Bible, and this is an issue. So this is what I will address. Okay. First of all, we'll go through 8 reasons that are kind of problematic here. So let me just go for the first reason, okay? Ordination in the Bible, case for its absence. Number 1, ordination as we know and practice it today is not found in the Bible. The way we do it, like the way we ordain pastors or lay hands on somebody else, this is not in the Bible. It's not found in the Bible. It does not exist in the Bible. That event, okay, does not exist in the Bible. So, but someone would say, hey, the Bible says, Mark 3:14, and he ordained the 12 that they should be with him and that he might send them forth to preach. And you got the word ordain right here. And this is of course King James Version, no other version uses this word, but the word here is not the word ordain. This is a Greek word, I've got it in Greek here, apoiesen, which simply means deed made, choose, called, nothing to do with ordination. So this word means, and he chose, and he called, and he made 12 that they should be with him. He chose 12 disciples. Essentially this is the correct translation, not ordained, chose 12 disciples. So this is one important thing. Ellen White builds up on KJV, and she talks about ordination of the 12 disciples, but it's not in the Bible. Okay, Jesus may have laid hands on them, but it's just not in the Bible. So okay, this is point number 1. We do not find ordination in the Bible. Point number 2, there are no examples of ordination rites in the Bible. This is interesting. We've got 2 examples of laying on of hands. Okay, and one is Acts 6, where the 7 have hands laid on them. And then we've got Acts 13, where Paul and Barnabas have their hands laid on them. Okay, so just 2 examples in the New Testament, but this is not ordination, pastoral ordination. The deacons, that's the 7 rather. There is no word deacon in the in Acts. It's just the 7. And how about Paul and Barnabas? They were not ordained as pastors. They were basically hands were laid on them as missionaries. They were going on a missionary trip. Okay, so and then the laying on of hands is mentioned somewhere here and there, and there's no clarity about laying on of hands. So there are no examples. Not once in New Testament we find that elders are ordained. Actually, I'm going to talk about this, okay? That's probably point number 4. Modern notion of the pastor's office does not readily correspond to the position of elder leader in the New Testament church. So when you read carefully, if you really want to read the Bible and apply what we find in the Bible to the modern Adventist church, it will be a different church. It will be something completely different. We would do things differently. Okay? The way we do things, I'm not saying they're wrong, but they're not in the Bible. We just don't follow Bible carefully. Not necessarily wrong, okay? We have development and so on, but it's not there. So a position of a pastor who stands in front of a congregation, like I stood today. I'm not a local church pastor, but he stands and he teaches and he has authority over this congregation, so to speak. Authority, we'll talk about in the second hour. Does not exist in the New Testament. We do not find this kind of ready correspondence. This is a later development, but not found in the Bible. Point number 4. No scriptural evidence for threefold ordination with hierarchical structure of deacon, elders, and pastors. How many ordinations do we have in our church? How many ordinations do we have? 3, right? You ordain deacon, you ordain elder, head elder, church elder, and then you ordain the pastor. Now the question is, how long does it take to ordain a deacon during the worship service? I think it's even specified in church manual that the service should last that long and so on. How long does it take? 5 minutes, a prayer? You invite people to front, lay hands on them, and done deal, right? How long does it take to ordain an elder in a local church elder? A bit longer, okay? You talk about biography a bit, probably. I don't know. How long does it take? 10 minutes, Shane?
For which one?
For elder.
For an elder?
Bit longer, right?
Maybe a little.
Yeah, a little. Okay, but position of elder is kind of higher than deacon. Okay, more important. How long does it take to ordain pastor?
What country are you in?
You tell me. How long does it take to ordain pastor?
In South America, 3 days, I guess.
3 days. Okay. No, I would say that in America, it takes all afternoon at camp meeting, right?
That's right.
So tell me, what does it tell you about importance? Okay, what does it tell you? Who is more important, who is less important? I mean, just even from the cultural right that we engage in, okay? It shows you that this is the least important people, right? This is the most important people. And you've got this hierarchical kind of thing here, going down from hierarchy, going down from pastor to deacon, and pastor has authority over everybody else, okay? And this is questionable because it's not in the Bible. It's just not in the scripture. It's not in the New Testament. So it is definitely questionable. So this is number 4, absence of this kind of thing. No 3 ordinations in the Bible. No direct scriptural evidence that local elders were actually ordained. You will not find, that's what I was talking about, you will not find an instance where Paul says, I will ordain elders, lay hands on the elders, and so on. No such thing. We've got deacons, the 7, and we've got Paul and Barnabas, lay hands on, but that's it. Done deal. Finito. Nothing else. But in Acts 14:23, it states, and Paul and Barnabas went around and ordained elders in each city. Wrong translation. If your Bible says that, it's a wrong word. The word is keirotoneo in Greek, which means raise hands. That means that people in congregation were voting for that person has a good spirit. We want that person to be an elder. So Paul is not ordaining anybody. Paul is choosing on the basis of vote. Okay, so this is the word keirotoneo, and that's what it means. So no direct scriptural evidence that local elders were actually ordained. We don't have that. Okay, no direct information that there's ordination of elders. Number 6, there's no evidence that only ordained pastors and elders are to lay hands upon those to be ordained. Like, for example, when pastors are ordained during the camp meeting in this area, who can lay hands on the other pastors? Only ordained people. Okay, find me one verse in the Bible that would support this. There's no injunction in the Bible, only ordained people can ordain other people. Okay, no such thing. And yet we practice it. That's what we do in our church. Where did that practice came from? I'll explain. Okay, we'll get to this. Point number 7. This is interesting. This is going to challenge you. Is it ordination for life or for task? Okay, was Paul ordained, say, and I even don't like the word ordination here because it was not, but the laying on of hands that happened to Paul in Acts 13, was it for life or for task? Okay, and here's an interesting thing, because what I'm going to show you is the only place in the Scripture where we approach a theology of laying on of hands. This is it, okay? Nowhere else you find what it means exactly, but here we find its scriptural injunction, what it means, okay? So this is found in Acts 14:26. Now listen carefully. And then sailed to Antioch, from whence they had been commended to the grace of God for the work which they have now completed. So this is a clear reference to Acts 13. So you will find beginning of the mission trip at Acts 13 and end of the mission trip in Acts 14. So they sailing to Antioch from the place where they were what? And here's an interesting thing. What happened to Paul and Barnabas? What happened to them in Acts 13:1-3? Here's a technical theological terminology here that Luke is using. They had been commended to the grace of God. That is number 1 point. Commended to the grace of God. Paradidomi, this is the Greek word paradidomi, simply means to give over, deliver, to blessed. Okay, in some way. So what happened to Paul and Barnabas when the hands were laid on them? They were blessed. They were blessed for the work. They were commended to the grace of God. They were given to the grace of God. That's it. Okay, that's all that happened to them. Nothing else happened to them. There was a blessing for their ministry, choosing, you go. We bless you as a church. We pray for you. We support you. You go. That's it. Blessing. So, and the next interesting thing, watch this. For the work which they have now completed. So it was not laying on of hands, doesn't appear to be for the entire life of Paul. It was for the particular work that it was given to him. And how do I know this? Because I discovered that in Acts 15:40, what's happening in Acts? Paul and Barnabas split. Remember, they had a short argument, and they split over John Mark. One will go one way and the other one goes the other way. And Paul decides, I'm going to choose Silas. Right? So look what's happening. This is a trip with Silas. And Paul chose Silas and departed, being commended by the brethren unto the grace of God. You've got identical wording here in this place with reference to Acts 13. Identical wording, being commended by the brethren to the grace of God. Paul was ordained twice. They don't mention laying on of hands, but Silas was not ordained before. So they needed to do the same thing as they did in Acts 13, this time to Paul and Silas, and they blessed them for a second journey. So laying on of hands most likely happened because this word was connected to laying on of hands in chapter 13. So most likely laying on of hands happened again upon Paul. So Paul was ordained twice. So it could be said, if I really wanted to follow the Bible, we would need to lay hands for every time new pastor comes into the church. All right, the pastor comes into the church and the community lays hands on him. And he goes to another church, the community lays hands on him. Okay, and everywhere they just reordain, so to speak, reordain the pastor. Okay, we've got clear evidence from the scripture that this is exactly what happened, using the same kind of language. So obviously this is not an accident, same kind of language. Okay, so obviously ordination was for task, not for life. What kind of ordination do we practice in our church?
For life.
For life. Is it wrong? No, I'm not saying it's wrong, but it's not biblical. Not everything that is not biblical is wrong, okay? But it's not biblical. Okay, so here you've got already 7 points that are problematic as far as the issue of ordination is concerned. So point number 8 is probably the most significant. Laying on of hands was used in variety of circumstances in the Old Testament and New Testament. So it was not just separating people to the work of ministry, but it was variety ways. So 26 times we find laying on of hands in the New Testament. Watch this. 16 times it refers to healing or blessing. Laying on of hands. Okay? It was conveying the gifts of the Holy Spirit. Several times we find about the gifts of the Holy Spirit. The gifts, when you lay hands, some kind of the Holy Spirit is imparted in some way. So this is the reference to this. And only 2 instances in the New Testament, clear instances, where there's endorsement and blessing of Christian workers. Just 2. So we did some kind of a reversal, because in our churches we practice laying on of hands only for ministry. We don't practice in any other way, only for professional ministry. So you've got 8 reasons here where the way we practice ordination, in my opinion, is unbiblical. I'm not saying it's wrong, I'm saying it's unbiblical. So this is the thing. We need to define what we mean by ordination. So I am a curious kind of a person. I told you during the sermon that I like to read and find out how things work. If something breaks, I need to get in and find out and fix it. I'm known as a fixer at home. My wife doesn't like it that much, because whenever she has a problem, I've got a solution. And she says, you just need to listen to me. And she's training me to listen to my daughters rather than fix their problems. But you know how it is, right? But I'm a researcher. I like to research things. I like to find things. So I've got 3 questions. Where do we get our way of understanding and practicing ordination? All right, that's a legitimate question. Where did we get it from? If it's not in the Bible, where did we get it from? Number 2, why is the ritual of laying on of hands today almost exclusively associated with ordination? Why don't we do it for children leaders? Why don't we lay hands on personal ministry people in the church? Why don't we lay hands on well, I think we should lay hands on those who lead kids. This is a very important job. But why don't we just spread it around rather than just keep it for pastors? This is kind of like not super biblical, in my opinion. Okay? And 3rd question, why can only ordained pastors lay hands on other pastors? Why on the platform there's usually a call, ordained ministers, please come and join us at the platform and we'll lay hands. Where did it come from? Did you find it in the Bible? Did you ever think about it? Where is it in the Bible? It's just not there, okay? So my question is, why? Why do we do that? Where did it come from? So, first of all, I would like to address the issue of terminology. Where did we get the word ordination from? And this is a fascinating story. It took me many hours to research. I presented in 1 minute, probably took me a few weeks to find it. But the term ordination is not in the New Testament. Why? Because it's a Latin word. New Testament was written in Greek. This is a Latin term. It never entered a vocabulary of the Bible because it was unnecessary, it was not needed, nobody wanted it in the New Testament. Certainly apostles didn't want it, and Jesus would never use it. Okay, it was in existence outside, but it was such a bad word, I think, that the New Testament doesn't use even once this word. Okay, in Greek, there's no translation in Greek for this word because it's a Latin word. Where did it come from then? It comes from Roman Empire. Ordination is not biblical, it's definitely pagan ritual that started happening in the pagan empire. So basically what it means, the rite of ordinatio was an incorporation into an ordo. Okay, into an ordo. Ordo is the word for order. Okay, same word, order that we get, order. So you've got classes of society, different classes, okay, castes or caste we could say, but you used ordinatio, Latin term, to elevate person to another position. That was the most traditional use. So there were 2 ways of using it. Okay, two ways they used this word ordinatio in the Roman Empire. This is not in the Bible, Roman Empire. The first one was a classical expression for the naming of imperial officers. This is what would happen when the emperor would want to appoint somebody to a higher position, to a position of oversight of something, a ruling position. He would ordain that person. So this is well in pagan empire. He's ordaining somebody. So for example, I found this in Suetonius, who was a chronicler historian of 1st century. So this is already at the time of Jesus and later. He writes, Domitian ordained Mettius Rufus to be prefect of Egypt. You have no idea how much time it took me to find those things in Latin. I don't speak Latin, but when I read translation, it's not obvious English, because English word would have appointed. So if I look for ordain in those Latin sources, I would never find anything, because so I had to go to Latin, had to do word search in Latin, and I came up with all bunch of interesting stuff. So this is one of the things that I found, that Domitian emperor ordained Matthias to be Rufus to be prefect of Egypt. So if he wanted him to rule over Egypt, and he ordained him to be the boss, to be the chief of Egypt, to rule over Egypt, okay? So this is one way of using the word ordinatio, from which our word ordination comes from. Another way, it was a little bit before the time of Jesus, it was used as an entry into higher order, higher class, higher status of people. In ancient Rome, there were three groups of people in the society. The highest group was Ordo Senatorum, which was the order of the senators. This was the highest ruling order. Okay, there were those people here who were with emperor ruling over the society. Then you had Ordo Equites. This is the class of knights that was the in-between order. And then you have Ordo Pleborum. This is the group of basically plebs. You know the word plebs? This is the basic people who, not important, okay? They're just people, bakers and shoemakers and whatever. They're just not important. Common people, the lowest class. Eventually, by the 1st century before Christ, only two groups remained. This group dies down, but two groups, Ordo Senatorum, Ordo Pleborum. Notice that the word ordo is here, connected to the word ordinatio. Ordo, ordinatio. Order, ordination, okay? So, normally people were born into those groups. You don't switch. Plebs never became senators unless they had something very special that they did for the emperor. So in order to transfer people from lower class into higher class, the rite of ordinatio was used. And the proof of it is in Historia Augusta. Once again, I found it in Latin, where it says this: "Nor did the Caesar Marcus Aurelius ever ordain anyone to senatorial rank whom he did not know well personally." Yes?
Wouldn't that have also happened to Pilate?
Possibly, yes.
Because he was a soldier.
Correct.
And was married to an upper crowd.
Correct. We could say that Pilate was ordained to be a prefect of Judea. Okay, so definitely that's how it was used. I didn't see it in the documentation, because I didn't look for Pilate. I look for general things. But here is the word ordine in Latin. So you can see that it was used in a pagan kind of system, really pagan, okay? This has nothing to do with Christianity. So I have a question. How did this concept enter Christian vocabulary? How come suddenly we find in literature that pastors are being ordained and everybody's using that word? How come did it happen? And I found a culprit. I have quite a study here. Tertullian, this is the Christian apologet, of the 2nd century. Okay, this was a second part of the 2nd century, was very crucial. Lots of changes into Christian church. So this is the guy who is the first one ever in history of Christianity, which is 160 or more. There will be almost 260, 70 years after Christ. Okay, he introduces the word ordinatio into Christian theology. Now, who was Tertullian? Tertullian was an apologet. What does it, Christian apologet? What does it mean? He didn't apologize for anything, but apologetics was a defense of Christianity. You defend Christianity. At this time, Christianity is very much oppressed and persecuted, and there were a group of Christian thinkers arose who wanted to defend Christianity so persecution would stop. So there will be no persecution. Of course, you can understand this. If you're a defender, if you're persecuted, you want to defend yourself, okay, and make rational arguments, so maybe persecution would stop. He is the first one who uses the word, because he says this: "We are Christians, just a normal group of people. We're good citizens. We obey the Caesar. We do things that needs to be done. Look, we even have a group of people in our community that we ordain." And he uses the word ordination. Okay, so he's the first one who introduces the word. He takes the word ordo, Latin pagan word ordo, and introduces it to name the group of bishops. Bishops belong to order. Like senators, we have bishops. Okay, we're very similar to the society. And ordinatio becomes appointment to a higher position. Okay, so this is the word used. We appoint somebody into a higher position. So it becomes an induction ritual for a bishop, priest, or a deacon. So you've got the introduction of this word ordinatio in the end of the 2nd century by Tertullian. And my question is, are there any problems with incorporating pagan words and customs into Christian theology? Any issues with that? Well, that depends, okay? That depends. On the one hand, you may say, no, absolutely not. We've got plenty of pagan customs now that we don't even know they're pagan, but we do them, okay? Shaking hands is a pagan custom, right? That's or saying bless you after somebody sneezes is a pagan custom, okay? But the word ecclesia was a pagan word in the past, means assembly. Now with ecclesia, we say it's a church. But ecclesia was just a group of people gathered together. If you recall when Paul went to Ephesus, and he preached to the group of people, that group of people who almost killed him, that was ecclesia. In Acts it's called ecclesia. and then in the Pauline writings we've got ecclesia as referring to church, so it's assembly. So nothing wrong, they incorporate the word, okay, gathering. Bridesmaids, okay, this is an interesting one. Do you know the history of bridesmaids? Well, why do people have bridesmaids? Okay, now they have bridegrooms too. Sorry, the group, whatever the name of those guys. Groomsmen, that's right, yes. But what was the story behind it? Well, originally, the whole idea was that when evil spirit came to the wedding, he would not be able to see which one is the bride, you know, which one is the bride. He would be confused. So there had to be several women there, so the evil spirit would not be able to do any harm to that woman. Okay, so now we have bridesmaids and nobody thinks twice about it, right? It's just a custom, okay? But on the other hand, there is a problem of hidden connotations. There's a problem of connotations, and this is, for example, why we don't use the word bishop as Adventists. The conference president or pastor is not a bishop. Why don't we use? Because the Catholic Church uses that word. We don't use the word Catholic. Catholic is a good word. Did you know that? I always teach in my classes there are 2 Catholic churches in the world. Roman Catholic Church and Seventh-day Adventist Catholic Church. Oh well, don't crucify me for this. Catholic simply means universal. That's all it means. It's a common church, okay? It means existing everywhere. That's all that means. We as Adventists are in most countries of the world, we are Catholic Church. That's what it means. But Catholic has a connotation when you put Roman Catholic with it. And suddenly you think Rome, Catholicism, and you connect this with apostasy and so on. That's why the word Catholic is not a good word to use. But in the 1st, 2nd century it was a perfectly good word. Everybody used that word. Katholike in Greek, it was a common message. We have a Catholic message to preach. It's a common message that all can be saved. That's what Catholic means. Message to all. Okay? So we don't use those words, and word sacraments too, because it's such a Catholic word. We don't have it in our vocabulary, Adventist vocabulary, because those are loaded words. Same with the word ordinatio. When ordinatio came into the Christian vocabulary, it was already a loaded word. It was a word that came with the idea of hierarchy. Are you with me? It was a hierarchical issue. So you ordain somebody to higher position, never to lower position. You always elevate somebody. And Tertullian used this to apply to ministry. So I have another question. What happened to the Christian ministry during the 2nd century that made use of the term ordinatio so enticing for Tertullian? Why did he use it? And this is a fascinating situation of biblical teaching going awry, going wrong. Okay? So let me give you very briefly, I don't have much time, very briefly what happened. So first of all, we'll go to this gentleman by the name Ignatius. Ignatius is a Christian thinker. Oh, okay. I thought somebody was playing piano here. Ignatius is a Christian thinker of the 2nd century. He dies around 130 AD, and he is, you see the lion here, he was martyred in the Roman arena in Colosseum. He died there. He was dragged by soldiers. He was a man dedicated to the unity of the church, I would say more uniformity of the church. He wanted everybody to do the same thing in all churches. And he's the first one to provide Christianity with a blueprint how church should operate. So he's the first one, Tertullian is another one, and Cyprian, I mentioned him this morning, is the third one. Catholic Church is built on ecclesiology, on teaching of those three thinkers. So what does he do? He elevates very highly the position of bishop, because he saw the more authority you give to the bishop, the more unity you're going to have in the church. The more the church will be united. You see, during his time, the church is persecuted, the church is scattered, the church is divided by schisms and variety of things. So giving authority to one person in the church, concentrating authority, was a solution for a unity, for being together, for uniformity. He also makes a distinction between bishops and elders. He's the first one in history to make the distinction. In the New Testament, in the Acts, this group is the same group of people. But he divides them. He elevates bishops over elders, and he's got deacons, and he's got something that we know today as threefold ministerial hierarchy. He's the one who introduces this. So up until then, we only had bishops and elders, elders, bishops, and the deacons. But after him, we've got three: bishop, elders, and deacon. So he's the first one to introduce this kind of situation in the church that we as Adventists practice to this day. So it does not go to the Bible, it goes back to Ignatius, what we do. He also teaches about monepiscopat, which means single bishops per city. Single bishop. In the past, there were many bishops in the city. Now we have one bishop per city. He was bishop of Antioch, and he believed that there should be only one bishop in whose hands all the power should be concentrated. One bishop of Alexandria, one bishop of Smyrna, one bishop of Ephesus, one bishop of Rome, and you know where I'm going with this. Okay, so he's the one who actually introduced this one person rule. Okay, he elevates the position of the bishop to the highest levels that never happened before. He speaks in his writings about bishop presides in place of God. So this is actual quote. A bishop presides in the place of God. So you can imagine what kind of authority he ascribes to the bishop, who is over elders and over deacons. So there's hierarchy.
Is that Loyola?
No. This is Ignatius of Antioch. Loyola is 1,500 years later. So 1,500 years later. This is Ignatius of Antioch, 130 AD. Okay, bishop presides in the place of God. Obedience to bishop is like obedience to Christ. Okay, so this guy introduces already in the 1st century. This is about 20, 30 years after John died. Okay, such a huge change. In Loyola did not exist even as a city at that stage. So the huge change in the whole system. Okay, so then comes another person by the name Irenaeus, and he also is middle 2nd century. He dies about 202, and he writes this: "Wherefore it is incumbent to obey the bishops who are in the church, those who I have known possess succession from the apostles, those who together with the succession have received a certain gift of truth." Now this is very important. He's the father of something that we call apostolic succession. That's the word succession here. What does it mean? You know of Pope Francis I today. He's in Rome. He was ordained by bishop before him, and the bishop before him was ordained by the bishop before him, and bishop before him, and bishop before him, and this is a kind of a chain. So contemporary Catholics believe that they can go right back to Peter, who they believe was a first bishop of Rome. It's been proven that he wasn't, but they believe it was. This is a foundational Roman Catholic doctrine. And together with becoming bishops, they have received a gift of truth. What it means in original, that they cannot make mistakes. if they get together as bishops, they will not make mistakes doctrinally. Okay, so you see that Ignatius elevates position of the bishop. This one puts all bishops in a succession going back to Peter and Paul, the first quote-unquote bishops of Rome, as Catholic Church believes, and they are endowed with a special gift. Today, the Catholic Church believes 100% this. This is a foundational Catholic doctrine going back to Irenaeus, and if you take it out of Catholic Church, then you basically destroy Catholic Church. I always tell my students, when you study with Catholics, don't go attacking Pope, because Pope means father. For many people, he is a father. And I've got friends who are Catholics who worship the Pope, you know, especially when he was Polish. That was just amazing. I could tell you stories about it. I mean, now he's a saint, okay, John Paul II. And I remember when he came to Poland for his first mass after his election. This was amazing, 1978. That was amazing what communist Poland went crazy. But anyway, why am I saying this? See, I'm still some Polishness in me. But anyway.
You're saying when you study with a Catholic.
Okay, when I study with Catholics, I say if you go and attack Pope, then some people may get offended. But if you go after Apostolic Succession, there's not a single proof in the Bible that Apostolic Succession exists. Okay? And you can do great Bible study and convince people that Catholic Church went the wrong way, okay, using Apostolic Succession rather than attacking papacy, which I agree there's a big problem with papacy, but we need to be careful how we study the Bible with them. But anyway, here you've got this development. So then comes Tertullian. He's also at the end of the 2nd century, and he's the one who introduced the word ordination. But he writes something like this: it is the authority of the church that instituted the distinction between clergy and laity, the honor shown the ranks of the clergy made holy for God. Now, tell me, who instituted the distinction between clergy and laity? The church. It does not exist in the Bible. This is a beginning of destruction of priesthood of all believers. This is the very beginning where priesthood of all believers, it goes away. The two different groups of people are created. Those who are ordained and those who are unordained. You've got two groups of people. One is laity and the other one is clergy. So when we use those terminology, clergy and laity, they are non-biblical. They actually go to Tertullian, to early Catholic Church, and we should not use that terminology. Up until recently, we had a course in the seminary, mobilizing laity. That pastors come and they mobilize laity. And I thought we should not use the word laity because we are all laity. The pastors are laity. Laos, it comes from the word Laos. We are all laity, okay? So they changed it finally. It's no longer, this is mobilizing church for evangelism now. So which is much better, okay? Than mobilizing, because the word laity and clergy, it brings the kind of a distinction between two groups of people. He is the one who introduces the word ordinatio. Like in the pagan world, you've got hierarchy, emperor, prefects, whatever, okay? So in the church, we've got bishops and elders and so on. And he says, okay, we do ordinations, don't persecute us. We are just like a society, group of people. He knows exactly what he's doing when he's introducing the word ordinatio into Christianity. He knows that by that stage there's already hierarchy in the church, hierarchy of power. So, ever since then, we've got this kind of situation in the church, okay? The division between two groups of people, between ordained clergy and unordained people. Ordinatio separates those two people, and you've got hierarchy in the church. Clergy divided by ordination from laity. God is somewhere here, authority flows down. Clergy, because they ordained, they've got special gift, they can rule over and serve as a mediator between God and laity. And that's the situation that we have in the church today, up until modern times. So very briefly, later developments. This is the very important guy. I spoke about him during the Sabbath school this morning. What Cyprian does, okay? So we've got four church fathers. Ignatius, Irenaeus, you won't remember this, but I'm just saying this. Irenaeus, Tertullian, and Cyprian. All those form a foundation for Roman Catholicism. and all of those, the teachings of all of those four seeped into Adventism in some way or another. Cyprian is also a martyr. He also died as a martyr, but this is 3rd century. He's the first one who introduces the concept of Christian priesthood. And this is interesting because you don't have anywhere in the New Testament that pastors or the elders or Paul or whoever does ministry is a priest. Why? Because the New Testament destroyed priestly ministry forever, once and for all. The cross of Christ finished with it, okay? There's no more priest. So the symbol of this was tearing of the sanctuary's veil, right? Okay, so what he does, I like to say it symbolically, he goes back to the sanctuary and says, the curtain is torn, let's us stitch it back up. And he stitches back up the curtain. Okay, and he introduces priesthood into Christian ministry. He turns pastors into priests. And this is a problem because we have one heavenly priest in heavenly sanctuary. What he does, he takes down the heavenly sanctuary and brings it down to earth. And every Roman Catholic Church today is its own sanctuary with its own priests, with its own sacrifice. And you have to go into the church in order to receive the benefits of sacrifice of church. You don't go to heavenly sanctuary, you go to local sanctuary. So this is a fulfillment of the prophecy, the sanctuary was cast down, Daniel 8:11, right? This is the demolishment of the heavenly sanctuary, which was put down on earth. Okay, and that's exactly what happened in Catholic Christianity, and Cyprian is very much responsible for this. So he looks at the Levitical priesthood and makes it equal to Christian priesthood, and he says pastors are priests now, and in order to go to God you have to go through the priest, mediation. Christian pastor becomes mediator, but only if correctly ordained. He has to be correctly ordained, otherwise it will not happen. So Cyprian is very, very important for Catholic Christianity, because with him it raises the importance of ministry, raises the importance of ordination, and the Christianity goes apostate. The moment you begin to, in history, the moment you begin to, listen carefully now, I'll come back to this. The moment you begin to make big deal of ordination, you're on the footsteps of apostasy. Okay, historically it is proven that's exactly what happened, because through ordination the priest assumed the place of Christ on earth. Okay, so I've got another lecture on this that we probably won't have a time to do this, but what happened is that in this very early period, up until middle of 3rd century and onwards, there's a change in understanding of ministry. From function to sacrament. Function means you do and fulfill a job. Okay, hands are laid on you, go and do the job. Okay, we bless you. Sacrament means that we ordain you so you can serve as a mediator between God and people. So you need to have Christian pastors. They are necessity in a Christian denomination, because they function as this link between God and humanity. So that's what it means. Pastors become channels of God's grace. And you know what? If you think that Adventism does not have it, I challenge you to go to missionary fields where I was. That's exactly what it is. I could tell you stories how people treated me differently because I was ordained pastor. They treated me as a channel to God. They felt if I bless them, it's like God blessed them. You know, that was horrible for me. But that's the reality in many places in mission fields in Africa, in Pacific, in Latin America. That's what it is. Pastor becomes the mediator. You know, I tell you something. I'm trying to squeeze in, but how many of you have ever done Bible studies with people? Okay, very good. A good number of you. What do we teach people in our Bible studies? What kind of doctrinal teachings we do? Sanctuary, okay, Sabbath, Second Coming, salvation, right? All those general topics, immortality of the soul and so on. For those who know, who did those Bible studies, how many of those Bible studies deal with the nature of the church? How many? Not one? Oh, how many of those Bible studies deal with nature of Christian ministry? How many? What is the role of a pastor? What the pastor do in the church? How many of those Bible studies deal with that? Tell me. Zero. And guess what happens? I speak from experience, from Polish experience. Poland is a Catholic country, right? 95% of population are Catholics. Brazil is a Catholic country. Latin America is a Catholic country. Mexico, okay? If we do Bible studies with people and teach them Sabbath, Sunday, Second Coming, immortality of the soul, and so on, but we don't teach them about the nature of church and nature of ministry, when they come to Adventist church, how are they going to treat pastor? What will they think about the church? They will incorporate the teachings from their past. And they will try to treat the pastor like they treat the Catholic priest, because they were not taught that there's a huge difference. There's a huge difference in understanding what the church is. Dramatic difference. There's a dramatic difference what ministry is, okay? And we don't teach people that. So people bring their ideas from the past denominations into Adventism because we have not done the good job on that. Okay? So Shane, when you do Bible studies, read, and Buzz, you need to remember that doctrine of church is part of the Bible studies material, because only then you can teach people what is the church and what is ministry, okay? But otherwise, whether you will want or not, you will talk about priesthood. I hear all the time today, men were priests, priests were men in Old Testament, okay? I even heard one famous evangelist at Tosk saying this, Adventist evangelist saying this, and I've got documented in writing, I can show you this. He says, as Christ is the priest in a heavenly sanctuary and he's a man, a pastor is a priest in an earthly sanctuary and he must be a man. It was spoken at Tosk, a Theology of Ordination Study Committee, okay? So here you've got classic example of bringing Catholic theology into Adventism to defend ourselves against women's ordination. This is bad. We can disagree on women's ordination, but let's not bring Catholic arguments, okay, into the whole equation. So, the first ordination in literature that we find occurs in apostolic tradition of a work that is attributed to Hippolytus of Rome. This is the first ever writing that really spells out exact order of tradition. It is in this writing that we find for the first time that ordination there is a threefold ministerial distinction. For the first time we really can see this at the beginning of the 3rd century. Before it was still unclear. Now each one receives separate ordination. Okay, you've got 3 ordinations in a Catholic church to this day. And only bishops are allowed to ordain other bishops. Why? Why? Because, and I explained that yesterday, ordination changes your soul. You receive a gift, and if you want to ordain others, you have to have that gift. You cannot pass on the gift that you don't have. So therefore, in Catholic theology, only ordained people who have the gift of truth can ordain other people. Okay, so this is where we got it from, unknowingly, that only ordained pastors ordain others. We got it from other churches. It's not in the Bible. It is a Catholic idea, definitely, because you cannot pass on something that you don't have. Okay, so in conclusion, we see a development from functional, service and preaching oriented ministry to sacramental that becomes essential for salvation, rank and status and ruling oriented kind of ministry. So this happened very quickly in Catholicism. From 2nd century, by 3rd century, 4th century, it was all done, finished, done deal. And to this day there is very little development in Catholic doctrine of church, very little. It's still on the foundation of those church fathers that I just gave you names from. So we have this kind of arrangement. God is above pastors, the pastors represent God to the laity. Authority flows down. The pastors have the same authority as God. They are functioning in place of God on earth. And that's how it is until this day. So this group is ordained because they are special representatives of God to this group. They hold a hierarchical authority over everybody else. So this is the Catholic idea that developed, okay? And authority, of course, is a big word I'm going to talk about in the second hour, in a few moments. That authority flows down, okay? And those people have authority over those people in terms of and that's what I talked this morning about priesthood of all believers, that Catholic Church created this interpretive group that can interpret Scripture for everybody else. They have ultimate authority over Catholic believers because they know what they teach and they have to teach others. Okay, so this is what happened, sadly, in the first 3 to 4 centuries, and of course this requires submission on the part of believers, the plebs, and all of it, as you saw, comes from Roman Empire. The early church modeled itself on Roman Empire. Therefore, Jerome, who lived in the 4th century to 5th century, he wrote, "There cannot be a Christian community without its ministers." Impossible. Cannot be a Christian community without its ministers. You have to have ministers. You have to have pastors in the church. If you take all the pastors out of Catholic communion, there's no more church. You have mediation ceases. Okay? It cannot happen. So let me ask you a question. If all the pastors disappear from Adventist church, would the church continue to exist?
Much better.
So let me ask you another question. Why do we argue about ordination if it's not important?
Because it is.
Okay, questions later. Okay, why do we argue about ordination? Okay, if the church would exist without pastors, why are we arguing about this? Okay, so let me just continue. Okay, the Protestant Reformation challenged the Roman Catholic Church, ordination and ministry, and this is the priesthood of all believers thing that we talked about today. But elevated status and prestige of ministry was never fully repudiated. Basically, this is a situation where in Germany, for example, when Germany was divided into provinces and we got a Prince Frederick who accepts teachings of Luther, and suddenly one day all churches are Catholic, the next day all churches are Protestant. You know, so in Catholic provinces, the Catholic Church stays Catholic, but in Protestant, they were converted to Protestantism by force. The believers one day were in Catholic Church, the next Sunday they are in Protestant Church. That's it, okay? So, of course, they were not taught. So the ideas, the Catholic ideas seeped into Protestantism. Then you have, out of this melting pot, and you see that I'm rushing a bit here, out of this melting pot, we've got development of Adventism. So what happens in Adventism? Okay, first phase, there's no creeds, no organization, no ordination. This is 1844, great disappointment. They were kicked out of the church. Remember this from history. They didn't want to have anything to do with any kind of organization. Organization was Babylon, okay? And so there was nothing. There was just nothing. There were people preaching the gospel and baptizing and whatever. There was shut door too theory. But the second phase, they find out that organization was necessary to fulfill the mission of the church. And by the early 1850s, around 1850, they begin to lay hands on the pastors. And the reason for this was that they were traveling ministers, and some of them were fake. They were fake news. Okay, to the church. So they would come to the church, okay, and they would fleece the people from the money, but they would not come from Adventist church. So James White, Ellen White, and Joseph White, they decided to give people a little card on which said, you are authorized by us. We are the same group of people. So a pastor shows up at the local church. They didn't have email. They couldn't check it up, okay, on the pastor. Okay, who are you? Why are you? I'm a Seventh-day Adventist pastor. There were no Seventh-day Adventists then yet. But I am a Sabbatarian pastor here, and I came from Ellen White and James White, and they said, can you show us your card? And he would pull out, here's the card. Okay, you can preach in our church. Okay, they had to defend themselves against people who had bad motives. So they started with giving those cards. They started blessing the people. And that's when Ellen White begins to talk about ordination. She and James White, they really pushed for organization because there was a huge opposition, huge opposition to organization. Half of the Adventism, I think, left because they were against any kind of organization. So they didn't want to have anything to do with it. So you will find this kind of, we need organization to do the mission. We need organization to do the mission. They were publishing over and over. So So they established organization. By 1863, we've got our organization established with pastors who are blessed by leadership, and they go and preach the gospel, establish churches. So ordained ministry had purely functional role. It was a role to go and preach the gospel and establish churches, plant the churches. That was it. That was the role of people who had their hands laid on. They were separated to this kind of ministry, purely functional. My question is, has this changed? Has this changed? And this is what we're going to take a look at.
Time to worship.
Time to worship. Okay, my question is, has this changed?
Sorry.
And you know what? I think it has. Have we moved from functional to sacramental understanding of ministry? I think in many places in the world we have. And this is why we argue about ordination. This is why we fight about ordination. In conclusion, and I really have much more to say on this topic, but this is what Ellen White wrote in Acts of the Apostles, page 162. At a later date, the rite of ordination by the laying on of hands was greatly abused. Unwarrantable importance was attached to the act, as if power came at once upon who received such ordination, which immediately qualified them for any and all ministerial work. So I have a question. And my question is, have we begun to attach unwarrantable importance to the rite of ordination in our church? And my answer is, sadly, yes. Because we spend a lot of money we spend on trying to discuss what is ordination. We fight about ordination. Some people see we should ordain some people, some other people don't. Ordination became this big issue in our church that distracts us from our mission, who we are as Adventists. Okay? We have begun to attach unwarrantable importance to ordination. And I think this is my solution. I don't say that we should adopt it as a church, but my ideal solution would be that we move away from the rite of ordination. It acquired too much rubbish around itself, too much baggage, and it's no longer a useful thing. When something becomes a detriment to mission, we have a responsibility to change it or do something with it, and just move on and do what God calls us to do. So this is what I wanted to present to you in a first presentation, just to highlight what happened in our church, that we suddenly became, over the last 50, 60 years, began to apply this huge importance to ordination, exactly what Ellen White would tell us not to do. Okay, so I want to leave you with this. We could go on. There's much more that I could say, but we'll have a little break, and we'll move on with the second very important presentation, super important presentation. So please be back here in 5 minutes.